The U.S. has been known to meddle in the affairs of others, taking on a reputation for being world police. Generally, all of this is done under the guise of spreading democracy or human rights across the globe. There are numerous instances, however, often where abuses are very severe, where the U.S. has not felt the need to spread the democracy that it places on a pedestal for so much of the world. Two such instances of this are Egypt and Uzbekistan. In Egypt, it took hundreds of thousands of protesters nearly 3 weeks to get some semblance of democracy, something they fought for all on their own, and even still they receive very little support from the U.S., who desires to sit on the sideline and not upset anyone, especially the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, SCAF, because at this time it is unknown how long they will remain in power, and the U.S. cannot risk falling out of favor with it, though this comes at a cost of angering the Egyptians, who are protesting daily to remove it. In Uzbekistan, any attempt by the people to rise up against the regime is squelched before it has any chance of being threatening. Like in 2005, when an uprising in the city of Andijan resulted in a massacre. Mainstream news coverage of this event was nearly unheard of in the West. The majority of the information available on it comes only from NGOs focusing on human rights, such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. Although situations in these two countries vary significantly, a lack of Western intervention is a common thread between them. What do these countries or their regimes have that makes the West, or here the U.S., so hesitant to take a stand? The U.S. has established a precedent for intervention through the numerous instances over the years in which it has felt the need to promote democracy around the world, most recently in Libya. Because of this, its deafening silence when the people of Egypt and Uzbekistan rose up and fought for a voice in their government is notable. What do these two seemingly disparate countries have in common that makes them so absent on the U.S.'s democracy radar? 3 things: access to high rents, a geographical position that makes them perfect ally in a hostile region, and an Islamic opposition that the regime can claim would take over in its absence and radicalize the country. It is not very difficult to decipher why the United States has remained remarkably silent regarding the pitiful state of democracy in Egypt. Egypt and Mubarak were an ally in a historically hostile region, and Egypt has strategic resources of great value to the United States. In addition, the main opposition to the ruling party is Islamist, and the state receives enormous rents. Because of these things, the Obama administration had feared that any call it issued to Egypt would be rejected by the regime. If this were to happen, American citizens, and indeed the world, would be left with the impression that Obama was too weak to influence one of the United States' closest allies and largest recipients of aid. Even during the January 25th revolution, the United States was slow to endorse the demands of the people as legitimate, for fear that if the U.S.-backed revolution failed, leaving Mubarak in power, the United States would almost certainly fall out of favor with one of its major allies in the politically critical Middle East, threatening stability in the whole region, if, say, Egypt were to go back on its peace treaty with Israel. In explaining how the two countries are similar, Martin Seif said it best. Uzbekistan's president, Islam Karimov, looks secure in his authority, but the problems hitting Mubarak appear more relevant to him than to any other leader in Central Asia. With just over 30 million people, Uzbekistan still has less than half the population of Egypt's 80 million, but it is nevertheless the largest and fastest growing in Central Asia, and that automatically generates massive social and economic challenges for any government, even one as well-financed and strongly centralized as Karimov's. Like Egypt and other countries across the Muslim world, Uzbekistan also is in the middle of a population boom and a youth bulge that are likely to continue in the coming decades. Like Egypt, more than 1/3 of Uzbekistan's population is under the age of 40. Early in the Egyptian Revolution, Senator Hillary Clinton made a statement that, quote, "Our assessment is that the Egyptian government is stable and is looking for ways to respond to the legitimate needs and interests of the Egyptian people." Why is it that despite the Egyptian people's obvious expressed desires, Senator Clinton still felt the need to support the Mubarak regime? Egypt has three main factors that lead to its ability to fly beneath the US's democracy radar. First, it has access to high rents or income due to its natural endowments, such as the Suez Canal and tourism. Second, it is an ally to the West in a critical region, especially due to its peace with Israel. Third, the main opposition to the ruling party, which was outlawed under Mubarak, is Islamist. Given Western fears of Islamic extremism, the fact that Mubarak was repressing an Islamic group was something that the US was happy to overlook. The situation in Uzbekistan is a bit harder to decipher. Although there are some similarities, namely an Islamic opposition, Uzbekistan is a far more remote country with fewer natural endowments in a less volatile region. Nevertheless, Uzbekistan is considered a US ally, with President George W. Bush making an explicit statement to that fact, mostly due to the fact that the US was being permitted to use an Uzbek airbase for its operations in Afghanistan. After the Andijan massacre, which the US did make statements against, the Uzbeks terminated the lease of the airbase and has been improving its relations with China, who supported government actions in Andijan. This is exactly the type of thing that the US does not want in Egypt. As stated, Uzbekistan also has an Islamic opposition, though it is commonly believed that Karimov greatly exaggerates the threat that it poses. In conclusion, it seems then that what is important for maintaining an authoritarian government, free from US intervention, is a strategic geographical location among volatile neighbors and an Islamic opposition that can be played up as threatening to US interests by saying that if these groups came to power, then the US would no longer have its ally in that strategic region. It seems then that the two countries, though they vary significantly, each have come up with an equation for non-intervention. Although Mubarak was ousted from Egypt earlier this year, the US is still staying out of Egypt's affairs while the SCAF is in power, and it is likely that it will continue to do so even after it leaves. This shows that even if the seeds of revolution have been planted in Uzbekistan, the people will still be on their own to remove their government, something that is unlikely to succeed due to the level of despotism employed by Karimov's regime.